Before you begin any tech startup, always remember the IDC framework: intellectual property, data, and control. Let's start with intellectual property or IP. This is the crown jewel of your tech business. It doesn't matter if you're creating software or hardware, this is what gives your business value because this is what represents your intellectual creation. There are many different types, but the three big ones to remember are copyright, patent, and trademarks. These protect different things. Copyright protects the form and expression of an idea. Practically, that basically means anything that's written down. So, for example, software code, tech documentation, system architecture diagrams, anything that's written down, that's all protected by copyright, and no one is allowed to copy your work without your permission. Patents are what protect inventions. So if you created a new way of doing things or a new method, you can register for patent to protect your invention and people can't use it again without your permission. Trademarks are what protect your business name, so your logo and your business name. This makes sure that people don't use your name again without your permission. In most countries, copyright automatically attaches to the written work the very moment you create it, whereas for patents and trademarks, you have to apply and register with the state. Once you know which intellectual assets are covered under which IP type, you then need to work out whether you have ownership or a license to that asset. And really, the core difference is around permission. When you own something, you don't have to ask others for permission on how you use it. You can do whatever you want with that asset. But when you're licensed to an asset, you generally only have permission to use it for certain purposes and you can't go beyond those permissions. It's basically an own versus rent analogy. And that's fundamentally how a tech business works. You create and own some things, you combine that with other components that you've rented or licensed from others, you package that up into a new product or service, and you then license that to customers for a fee, and that's how you make money. If you're writing software, you're most likely going to use open source code, for example, stuff downloaded from GitHub. Now, even if the open source library is made available for free, that doesn't mean you own it. You should always check whether the open source library has a license attached to it, which you can often find quite easily on GitHub. Open source licenses can be categorized between permissive and copyleft licenses. There's actually a lot to this, so long story short, I would be very careful with copyleft licenses, for example GPL, as they can set very restrictive conditions on how you use their code. Permissive licenses, on the other hand, such as MIT and Apache, are quite developer friendly. The key thing to note in any license is whether they actually allow for the use case that you want to use their code for. So, for example, commercial use. Alright, data. So, chances are, if you're in the tech business, you're most likely in the business of processing data. This is a big one for AI startups. The key buckets of data to be thinking about are personal data, confidential information, and IP. We already talked about IP above, so let's focus on these two. Personal data is data that can identify an individual. So, for example, names, addresses, your facial image, or more sensitive examples such as health information and your passport number. Most countries have laws that regulate how you process personal data, and often you have to have a privacy policy, which is your key instrument to get your customers' consent on how you collect, store, use, disclose, and transfer their personal data. You have to be clear on who, what, when, where, and why you're doing these things. So you really need to think twice as to why you need personal data for your business. Are there other types of non-personal data that you can use to achieve the same purpose? Or if you do need personal data, can you de-identify and anonymize it in the first place so that you protect customers' privacy? Also think about if you can keep the data onshore or in your country's local servers. The fancy word for this is data localization. Some countries have laws that require you to keep certain forms of data, for example, health information or government information onshore. This is quite relevant if you're in the software or SaaS space where you need to think about where to host your databases and your servers and your APIs. Just quickly on confidential information, this is basically any information that you've received from your customers or suppliers or from other people that expect their information to be treated with confidentiality. You got to make sure that if you ever want to use this sort of information in your business, that you continue to apply with these obligations, which can either be set out in contract or under law. This is often the miscellaneous catch-all bucket for things that are not covered by personal data or IP. Finally, control, and I'm talking about control of 5 key things. Each topic deserves its own video, but in summary, control of tech means the control of the underlying IP in your tech business and also the ability to suspend or switch off the service if your customer abuses it. Control of company here refers to corporate governance, so basically the board, shares, how you define your relationship with your co-founders and your shareholders, basically all the stuff to ensure that you can run your company smoothly and also not get kicked out from your own company. Control of personnel refers to how you manage your employees and contractors through contract. The key thing here is that any IP created by your employees or contractors in the scope of the employment or contractor relationship is assigned back to the company so that you have the relevant rights to sell your service to your customers. Just because you hired someone doesn't automatically mean the IP belongs to your company. Control of customer basically means the terms of service in place to protect your service from being abused or misused by your customers and also to make sure that you get paid for your product. Finally, control of investor, how you negotiate with investors so that you don't get unfairly exploited by the investors for putting money into your company. Okay, that was a quick crash course on legal foundations for tech startups. Follow me for more simple pen and paper explainers.